So the title of this paper is The Anthropology of Medieval Śākta Yoga in Textual History and Ritual Practice. I'll focus on what I suggest is a particular and distinctive Śākta anthropology of tantric Śāktism, a particular Śākta model of the yogic body that we find in texts and practice. And we see it depicted here in the middle of the screen. And perhaps the earliest example of this is found in the Netratantra, 9th century text, which I'm currently editing and translating together with my colleague, Gavin Flood. So this Śākta anthropology is aimed at the affirmation and divinization of the body through visualizing meditation. In its prototypical form, the 6+1 chakra system, which probably originated in Kashmir, became pan-Indian via the South Indian Srividya tradition and was eventually exported to the West, where it became part and parcel of global religious history. However, in addition to this focus on a medieval text and context, I'll also be drawing on some examples of this Śākta anthropology in practice from my fieldwork amongst the yogis from the Kālīkula tradition in Nepal. I'll do so in an attempt to address the question of synergy, interplay, and overlap between texts and ritual performance in Śākta traditions, as Janaki has suggested as a theme for this very interesting conference. My suggestion is that yoga as visualizing meditation forms a kind of middle ground between text and ritual, and an example par excellence perhaps of the interplay and dynamics between theory and practice. And furthermore, what interests me as a historian of religion and a textual scholar is the question to what extent can fieldwork throw light on textual studies and vice versa. However, before I turn to the text and the Śākta anthropology, I'll first address the question of Śāktism and what I mean by that term as a follow-up on Gavin Flood's excellent keynote lecture. So first and foremost, there's always been independent veneration of a goddess or a multitude of goddesses identified with a single supreme goddess in South Asia and many parts of the subcontinent, such as Bengal and Assam and Nepal, as well as South India and also Rajasthan, are home to vibrant Śākta traditions and goddess worship, where it is the goddess in her singularity, without a consort, who is worshipped. So the idea that Śākta traditions are fringe phenomena, extreme forms of tantric practice, or that Śākta traditions are only adjuncts of feminized Shaivism or Vaishnavism does not really tally with the lived reality of worship in South Asia, both presently and historically. And as an example, I would like to mention Bjarne Wernicke-Olesen, who has shown that there are more than 240 Śākta inscriptions to be found going back to the 2nd century CE that are invoking worship to a goddess who is exalted as supreme and all-powerful, just like Shiva or Vishnu. However, although people in India and Nepal have known this for a very long time, there's still an inconsistency within the academic discourse on Hinduism, where it is still important to demonstrate and argue that Śāktism exists as a distinct tradition and represents a major historical development in South Asia and beyond. Furthermore, it should be noted that Śāktism is not only a standalone tradition, but it has also permeated other classical traditions apart from Shaivism, such as Vaishnavism, Jainism, and even Buddhism, where strong traditions of Hindu tantric goddess worship have been incorporated. However, in this paper, I will only focus on the Hindu dimension of Śāktism. So when turning to the definition of Śāktism in an academic context, one could make the point that Shaivism may be better defined by a Shaiva as someone who adheres to a system related to the deity Shiva, since, as Alexis Sanderson has pointed out in his famous article on Shaivism and the Tantric traditions from 1988, a Shaiva may well be a worshipper of the goddess rather than Shiva, However, although Śāktism is often less easy to define than Vaishnavism and Shaivism, it may actually be meaningfully defined by its very object of ritual and meditation. So I would therefore suggest the following addition to the definition of Śāktism found in my Blackwood chapter on Hinduism and the goddess, namely that the great goddess Devi and her network of Śākta traditions in South Asia have been subsumed under the broad category of Śāktism, that is, tantric and non-tantric traditions, focusing on a goddess or a group of goddesses with a tendency to elevate and identify one goddess as Śakti, as power or force with ultimate reality, and as the main object of worship and meditation. However, here we have some examples of the confusion that one may encounter in an academic discourse, as found in handbooks, introductions, companions, dictionaries, etc., in South Asia as well as in Europe and in the English-speaking world. So one may question whether Śāktism is a major Hindu tradition, if it is simply a fringe phenomenon, a medieval subsect of Shaivism, if it is a kind of feminized Shaivism, or even Hindu Tantrism par excellence, while some would argue that there's no such thing as Śāktism, that it is non-existing. So generally speaking, we may say that on a conventional level, there's more or less agreement that Śāktism forms one of the major Hindu traditions next to Shaivism and Vaishnavism. However, on an analytical level, there's still much confusion and a tendency to reduce Śāktism to a subsect of tantric Shaivism. So here we have two examples of Śāktism as a major Hindu tradition on a conventional level. This is from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, where Śāktism is listed together with Vaishnavism and Shaivism as one of the major forms of Hinduism practiced today. And in Wikipedia, we have Śāktism along with Shaivism and Vaishnavism as one of the primary schools of devotional Hinduism. And here we have an example from Axel Michel's introduction to Hinduism, past and present. Excellent introduction. However, here Śāktism has suddenly disappeared as a major Hindu tradition. There are only two major Hindu traditions, Vaishnavism and Shaivism, and we find Śāktism reduced to a small subsect under sectarian Shaivism. And in research history, this relationship between Tantrism and Śāktism has often been illustrated by two circles. So here we have an example of two coinciding circles of Tantrism and Śāktism. So the broader circle is Tantrism, tantric Shaivism, and within that we find Śāktism. And here we have a lot of other circles throughout research history, exemplifying the relationship between Śāktism and Tantrism, from Tantrism and Śāktism as synonyms, really one circle, to two separate circles, von Haus aus verschiedene Dinge, as Helmut von Glasenapp suggested, and two intersecting but not coinciding circles. Coinciding circles, and then the two river models, where Shaivism and Śāktism may be seen as two rivers meeting in the second half of the first millennium CE. So when looking at conceptual history in a Western academic context, we find that the origin of this confusion may be traced back to Monier Williams, who coined the two isms of Śāktism and Tantrism in 1877. And unfortunately, he took these two neologisms as synonyms for what he described as Hinduism arrived at its last and worst stage of medieval development. So they all became pejoratives. And this meant that the study of both Śāktism and Tantrism was neglected by Indology, and it caused a lot of confusion. As the grand old man of tantric studies, André Padeau wrote in 1981 concerning the relationship between Śāktism and Tantrism. The difficulty in defining the relationship between Tantrism and Śāktism is in fact due largely to the imprecision of these two notions, which we inherited from a time when the tantric texts were as yet little known and when we had not yet realized the extent of the tantric phenomenon. Further knowledge and the resulting fuller grasp of the two notions of Tantrism and Śāktism will help clear the confusion. It may even make the problem disappear. So going back to the circles and Gavin Flood's keynote, our suggestion is that Glasenapp was accurate in his description of Śāktism and Tantrism as being not synonyms, but two separate things originally. However, in the second half of the first millennium CE, these two circles, they met, these traditions, as two streams of rivers, met and resulted in two intersecting but not coinciding circles. These different approaches to the relationship between Tantrism and Śāktism, and more broadly between Śāktism and the other major Hindu traditions, decides on, you could say, on the conceptual model, the model building of Hinduism. And this two-river model results also in a highly complex model of Hinduism, consisting of 3 or 4 major Hindu traditions, 3 major forms of religion, and different modes of religious activity. And it should be pointed out that, of course, a conceptual model like this is not the truth about Hinduism. It is a heuristic model. It's a tool to think with in order to gain a more adequate, a more accurate understanding that allows for an accumulation of complexity and also allows one to point out and throw light on the problem areas, such as the area of confusion that is shown here as a circle in the middle, namely the overlap between tantric Shaivism and tantric Śāktism. However, as we have seen, this may be explained by the two intersecting but not coinciding circles thesis. So we find this development expressed in Alexis Sanderson's groundbreaking research on the mapping of the tantric traditions as well, from earlier research where we have the two coinciding or overlapping circles in his 1988 article to the two intersecting but not overlapping circles in his latest research, as he expressed it in a keynote for the Śākta Traditions Conference in 2011. This may actually be seen as a radical revision or extension of his work. So what has been hitherto represented as a more elevated mystical tradition within Shaivism is indeed so seen from the perspective of later Shaiva practitioners, but it is also a very archaic and independent Śākta tradition from the outside, which has been preserved in spite of various attempts at reformation and assimilation. So this may indeed be seen as a confirmation of Helmut von Glasenapp's original thesis from 1936. And what Sanderson is suggesting here is to define Śāktism based on its ritual system rather than on its worldview. So what we have is an independent Śākta Kapalika ritual system coming in from the side with various characteristics distinguishing it from tantric Shaivism that have already been mentioned by Gavin Flood in his keynote. So we find here erotic ritual, blood offerings, supernatural powers, initiation through alcohol and with a duty, female consort. We find avesha, possession, and so on. This list is cumulative. These are 5 core characteristics. And this separates it from the Shaiva Siddhanta ritual system. Particular elements have been emphasized, for example, the erotic ritual, which David White has referred to as hardcore Tantra, but it may in fact, in this context, be considered hardcore Śākta, and as well as the blood offerings are significant. So this Śākta ritual system was preserved within Tantric Shaivism in the Mantramarga as the Kulamārga. And we can see that it underwent different phases, and the different periodizations more or less amount to this development from Kula to Kāla to high cultural Śāktism, and then eventually exported to the West in a kind of neo-tantric form, as mirroring the Shaktivada prevalent in Bengal at the time. So these traditions, the Tantric traditions and Śākta Tantric traditions, are among some of the most complex, challenging, and influential forms of religion in South Asia, in the words of Harunaka Isaksson, and they have had an enormous area of influence, which we may refer to as the Indo-Asian region, the Indosphere, or perhaps the Sanskrit cosmopolis. Its heyday in India was during the Shaiva age, periodization coined by Alexis Sanderson from the 5th to the 13th century, where Tantric Shaivism was the mainstream religion in India. And after this, we see a Tantric renaissance in Nepal under the Mallas from the 13th to the 18th century, and especially from the 15th to the 18th century. And one of the ways that Śāktism endured after the Shaiva age was in the form of Hatha Yoga, as James Mallison has pointed out in his article on Śāktism and Hatha Yoga. Indeed, the yogic body plays a central role in the Tantric universe, and it does so as well in Tantric Śāktism, where apart from having the goddess as Śakti as the object of ritual and meditation, we also find a striking focus on a particular Śākta anthropology or Śākta yogic body as the sociological path. So in the words of Audrey Perdue, to live and to be present in the world as a Tantrika is to live in a universe pervaded by divine powers, by the power Shakti of the deity, a universe experienced as a field of energy in which the body is immersed. The body is part of the universe, reflecting its structure. Supernatural forces and deities are present, animating the body and connecting it with the cosmos. And a body whose structure and life are simultaneously human, cosmic, and divine is also a yogic body. And the place and the role of the human body in Tantra are such that most aspects of the Tantric domain could be studied from the body's point of view. So this lecture may be taken as an example of, at the same time, scholarship on the yogic body marks research desideratum, as has been pointed out by Mallinson and Singleton. So scholarship on the yogic body is as yet undeveloped. In particular, there has been no comprehensive study of the multiple conceptions of the body taught in Tantric texts, which form the basis of treatments of the subject in subsequent teachings on yoga. So I'll now turn to one of our earliest sources in relation to the Śākta model of the yogic body, namely the Netratantra, the Tantra of the eye, which was an important Śākta Shaiva text in Kashmir and Nepal, dating from around the early 9th century and widely disseminated during the 10th and 11th centuries. And I'm currently working on an edition and translation of the Netratantra, together with my colleague Gavin Flood, based on the oldest surviving Nepalese manuscript from 1200 CE called the Amritesha Tantra in Nepal, which we see here. So the Netratantra occupies a middle ground and claims universality as a Sarvasamanya Tantra, overriding the distinctions between the orthodox Vedic scriptures, the Shaiva Siddhanta, the Mantramarga, and the Kulamārga, as well as divisions outside of Shaivism. So interestingly, the text has absorbed material from different social strata and a variety of Indian traditions in its aim for a universal appeal. So the Netratantra is strongly influenced by goddess worship and the Kulamārga, and represents an important early point of entry and incorporation of the Śākta traditions into Shaivism. And the Netratantra may be the earliest known Tantra to mention the kulamnāya, or tantric goddess worship, as we see here in a reference from chapter 12. So now I will explain the worldview of the sacred tradition of the Kula. The Netratantra is also the earliest known Tantra to present a Śākta model of the human, or what may be referred to as a Śākta anthropology, in its 7th chapter on subtle visualizing meditation, as we see here. So it's the first Tantra to teach a system of 6 bodily centers, which the meditating yogi is supposed to pierce with his inherent power, or Śakti, which is also referred to as kuṇḍalī, the coiled one, or nādasūcī, the needle of sound, in order to attain a divine body, a divyadeha. The Śākta anthropology is introduced in the first few verses and then elaborated in this chapter. So I'll just read a bit from this remarkable passage. So now I will tell you about the excellent, supreme, subtle visualizing meditation, which comprises the 6 chakras, the 16 supports, the 3 focal points, and the 5 voids, the 12 knots, the 3 powers, the shaktis, the path of the 3 luminaries, and 3 channels. The text here presents an early Śākta appropriation of different older yogic models of knots, the grandis, supports, the ādharas, etc., foregrounding the central channel, the sushumna, and the notion of how the yogi causes the ascent of his inner power as an early form of Kundalini yoga. So what we get is a highly complex and esoteric Śākta yogic model of the human. As David White has suggested, it is perhaps one of the most complex and difficult soteriologies that we have ever encountered in the history of religions. And here we have a later Nepalese depiction of such a Śākta anthropology from around the 811 CE. This yogic body is overrun by a host of channels or systems of nadis, rivers, through which the divine nectar, the amrita, can flow and turn the body into a divine body, a divyadeha. So the power, or shakti, is made to flow in the central channel, the sushumna channel, between the 2 channels of exhalation and inhalation that were later known as Ida and Pingala. Furthermore, the yogi's inner power, Shakti, was also conceived of in terms of sound or inner vibration. Here we have nādasūcī, the needle of sound. And this pattern was repeated, as James Mallinson has shown, when the visualizing meditation of the Kundalini yoga model was overlaid onto the physical Hatha yoga practices in the 15th century Hatha Pradipika by the early Nats, in combination with Laya and Nada yoga, or the yoga of sound. So the Netratantra's chapter on subtle meditation is significant in that it presents 2 different anthropologies and systems of visualization, which the Trika commentator Kṣemarāja refers to as a Kula system, the kulaprakriyā, and the tantric system, the tantraprakriyā. So while the inherent power only rises up through the sushumna channel in the tantric system, the same power rises up in the Kula system and reaches a reservoir of nectar, amrita, in the head instead of Shiva, which then drenches the body on its way down through a multitude of subtle channels, the nadis, causing somatic joy and immortality. And this technique of drenching the body is later referred to as amrita plavana in the mid-15th century Hatha Pradipika, by which the yogi becomes a divine body bereft of all disease. However, we also find this Kula system of amrita plavana repeated at the ending of chapter 7, such as here, that the yogi should visualize the entire body completely filled with the nectar of the central channel, flowing through the endless channels completely through to the pores of the skin. The commentator Kṣemarāja's division of chapter 7 is not quite accurate here. The Śāktism of this chapter is all over, you could say. We also learn that the yogi should become of the same essence as yoginis, and he should merge with the perfect condition of yoginis via a yogic technique known as the sky goer, and we are not quite sure what the reference is here. But we may take this as an example of the Śāktisation of the Netratantra. And as Gavin Flood pointed out in his lecture, the path of the Kula is a path of transcendence where the practitioner wishes to become a Kicharin, a mover in the sky of consciousness. So the kulaprakriyā system of visualizing meditation forms part of a distinctive Śākta anthropology, which is later combined with the physiologically fixed model of the six-chakra system found in the 10th century Kuptika Tantra of the Western Kaula transmission, the Paschimānāya. So here we have the elaboration of the six-chakra system in the Netratantra, and I'll just read this bit. So now the six-chakra system, the Chakram, is told. The channel circle is known as birth. In the navel is the supreme circle known as illusion. The yogi chakra is in the heart. The place of the uvula is remembered as splitting, and the place of the bindu is known as rupture, while the place of sound is said to be tranquility. The yogi should pierce all the chakras previously spoken about with the trident of knowledge. So the names of the chakras are different, but the model is more or less the same, including the location of the chakras, except the Svadhisthana chakra. Just for comparison, here we have a probably more familiar and standardized version of the chakras from the 10th century Kuptika Tantra. And just like the Netratantra, the Kuptika Tantra contains different versions and visualizations of the chakra systems. For example, the 5-chakra system described by Dorothy Heiligskær-Seelen. However, in the 11th chapter of the Kuptika Tantra, we find the origins of the classical and widespread 6-chakra system of Hatha Yoga. So in this chapter, the 6 chakras are explicitly physiologically fixed. So the anus is called the base, the Adhara, the Svadhisthana, arises at the penis, Manipuraka is in the navel, and Anahata is in the heart. Vishuddhi is in the region of the throat, and Agya is between the eyes. So this standardized version of the 6-chakra system, in combination with Kundalini Yoga, became prevalent from the 12th century onwards, and was further developed when it was adopted by the South Indian Sri Vidya goddess tradition. In the 14th century Sri Vidya text, the Shiva Samhita, a 7th chakra was added to the 6-chakra model, and we got the 6+1 chakra model with the Sahasrara Padma, or 1,000-petaled lotus chakra, added on top. When this model was adopted by 2 of India's most successful ascetic orders, the tantric Nath yogis and the ascetic sannyasis, the Śākta model became pan-Indian and was later exported to the Western world. And we could elaborate that in the 20th century, a High Court judge in the British colonial administration in Calcutta, Sir John Woodruff, writing under the nom de plume Arthur Avalon, decided with the help of local pandits to translate several tantras into English. And one of the most popular and influential, arguably, of these translations were the Serpent Power from 1919, which was based on the 16th century Sri Vidya text, the Shat Chakra Nirupana, or explanation, investigation of the 6 chakras, promoting a Śākta anthropology based on a Kundalini and chakra model very similar to the one found in the Shiva Samhita. So in this way, a Śākta anthropology originating in the medieval Indian Kulamārga eventually became part and parcel of global religious history. And all this was, of course, originally esoteric and secret practice knowledge, only for serious practitioners under the supervision of a guru, of a teacher. So returning to the Netratantra, we find at the end of the dialogue in chapter 7 that Shiva, as Amritesha Bhairava, proclaims to his beloved wife, Amrita Lakshmi, that except for you, O devoted one, this practice has not been revealed by me to anyone. Now it has been revealed to you, one may add. So on one hand, it is often assumed that religious practice constitutes the basis for the internalization and transmission of religious narratives and conceptions. And on the other hand, it is argued that religious practice should be studied in separation from symbolic systems and generation of meaning. However, as I've argued with Silje Lynge Einersen in a 2018 article in German, yogic practice knowledge, or Übungswissen, seems highly suitable to illustrate the close relationship between yogic theory and practice, and therefore also provides a strong case for the possibility that fieldwork may throw light on textual studies, and vice versa. So one could ask why Nepal and the Kathmandu Valley, and there's a historical background for this, that in the 13th century we saw the end of Shaivism's period of dominance, including the high cultural Śāktism of the Kulamārga, due to significant political changes caused by invasions, the Delhi Sultanate, and the introduction of Islam on a large scale. After this time, the tantric, Śākta, and Shaiva traditions, they lose their political influence in Kashmir and North India, but they continue to thrive in South India, especially in the form of Sri Vidya, as well as in Northeast India and Nepal, you could say, rather in its Kālīkula forms under the Malla kings, and especially in the 15th to the 18th centuries in what has been referred to as the Tantric Renaissance. And this is where our manuscript is from. So it's not only manuscript sources that have been preserved in the mild and friendly Kathmandu Valley, but also several medieval Kaula traditions, such as the cult of Tripura Sundari and the goddess Kuptika, which are still living traditions in Nepal today. When turning to Nepal, doing fieldwork of some of the first few surprises that one encounters could be something like that all Aghorīs in Nepal do not come from India, and they're not all Shaivas, as has been suggested by some scholars. And some of these Aghorīs actually identify as Śākta Aghorīs, and some are from Nepal. And as mentioned, the Kuptika tradition has not died out, but is still a living esoteric tradition in the valley. Nad yogis in Nepal have not all exchanged the wild goddesses with mild goddesses and turned to Sri Vidya, such as most Nad yogis in North India. But many, if not most, Nad yogis in Nepal are actually oriented towards the Kālīkula. The Nad yogi sampradaya is not always separate from the Aghori sampradaya in Nepal, as is usually the case in India, and many yogis belong to the Ramnath Aghori sampradaya from Bengal. So a first example would be Chandi Baba Guru living at the Chandeshwari temple in Toka, the oldest Neva town in the valley. Chandi Baba is a teacher, and in his practice he's operating with a standard 6+1 chakra system that is physiologically fixed, and he identifies as Śākta Aghorī and is from Nepal. In describing his Kundalini practice, he showed me this remarkable picture of a Kundalini raising gone wrong. As he said, Kundalini yoga is no joke. The picture is taken just at the moment when the Kundalini Shakti during practice went out from the Sushumna channel and actually broke his left shoulder. And as he pointed out, Kundalini Yoga is a long and dangerous path, and it will take a lifetime of practice to master. In describing his Kundalini Yoga practice, he also mentioned the yogic technique of the skygoer, the Khichari Mudra, resulting in an Amrita Plavana, or drenching of the body. And he described the technique as a kind of kumbhaka, resulting in Amrita Pana, the drinking of Amrita. So he described the physical sensation of Amrita overflowing the body all the way out through the pores of the skin, beginning with the head and hair, and then all the way down the body. And thus this practice would be an index of the kulaprakriyā system of tantric Śāktism, rather than the tantraprakriyā system of tantric Shaivism. And it is indeed text and tradition specific, although he described his knowledge as embodied and representing an oral tradition. And of course, he had not heard of texts such as the Netratantra or Amritesha Tantra. The late Kali Baba became a disciple of Dr. Ramnath Aghorī, who was a Vamakhepa Bhatta Aghorī from Tarapet in Bengal when he was 12 years old. He was then sent to Nepal as his karma days, or place of practice, and stayed there for 50-some years on a mountain in Telkot. So he identified as a Śākta Aghorī and told me that it had taken him around 20 to 30 years to learn to practice Kundalini Yoga. And each year I visited him, his Kundalini Yoga practice had changed slightly. So some years there was only one chakra, some years 3, 7, or 8 chakras. And it depended on one's mood and meditation, as he explained. The chakra systems are just tools for visualization. So this understanding fits with the more arbitrary numbers of chakras and different models of the humans found in earlier texts, such as the Netratantra, and also the Kuptika Tantra before the standardization and physiological fixation of the chakras into the 6+1 chakra system. So according to Kali Baba, when Kundalini Shakti would reach the head chakra, it would meet not with Shiva, but with the goddess, either in the form of Kali, Durga, Uma Maheshwari, or Bagalamukhi, which is one of the Mahavidyas in Nepal. And this maybe point out to be a striking resemblance to the Kundalini Yoga of the oral tradition school, the Sarvamnaya school that is particular to the Nevas in the Kathmandu Valley, where the goal for the Tantrika is to realize his or her identity with the highest goddess, the Mahadevi, which could be in the form of Tripura Sundari or Kali. The late Dr. Śākta Aghorīs was a famous Ramnath Aghorī living at the Bhasmeshwar Ghat in the Pashupatinath temple area. And he described himself as a Śākta and a worshipper of Kali. And he told me that he had operated with 7 chakras and only 7 chakras. He had practiced the tongue twisting technique of Khichari Mudra until recently. And when asked about the result of this technique, he would say that it depended on one's disposition, and acknowledging that the technique may be used in different contexts for different results. However, the one result that he described was indeed the Amrita Plavana, or drenching of the body with nectar, as an index of a Śākta imaginary. It was also argued by Dr. Śākta Aghorīs, and also more generally by Nath yogis and Śākta Aghorīs that are met in Nepal, that external ritual is more for Aghorīs, and internal Kundalini Yoga is more the practice of Nath yogis. And some would start out as Aghorīs practicing external ritual, and would then go on, if they qualified, to practice internal Kundalini Yoga as a Nath yogi. So So what may we sort of provisorically conclude about the relation between text and ritual in relation to yoga as a visualizing meditation? Well, we could say that the yogi needs, through the practice of visualizing meditation, to realize his true nature as part of a religiously defined cosmos. So he participates in a shared theory of cosmos that is handed down from the supreme deity of the tradition, in this case, a female deity, through a personal transfer of knowledge in a line of succession from teacher to student, a parampara. And this theory of the cosmos is then internalized through repeated and ritualized yogic practices and codified onto the yogic body. One may use the term intextualization of the body. So the body is thought to be deified through these practices. And this happens when cosmological levels are hierarchically identified with parts of the body, whereby through cosmological homologies and systems of correspondences, a tantric body is created, and in this case, a Śākta tantric body. Cultural knowledge, and not least yogic practice knowledge, may thus consist of non-verbal, visionary, and bodily experiences that are internalized ritually. And very interestingly, as the fieldwork shows, these bodily experiences are often closely related to specific textual narratives, taxonomies, and conceptions that connect the yogic individual with the tradition in a very text-specific way. And finally, while there are no surviving texts from the original Śākta influx into Shaivism, namely the Soma Siddhantins or the original Śākta Kapalikas through the Atimarga 3, we do find expressions of the antinomian cult and practices in later texts from the Vidyapita and Kulamārga. And we see that the early Kula phase was dominated by visionary transgressive cults based on the creation ground asceticism of these early Śākta Kapalikas, who were once widespread from Kashmir and Nepal in the north to the Tamil-speaking south. And in the picture here, we see Aghorī Guru Manikandan from the true Aghorīs, as they call themselves, from Tamil Nadu, whom I had the honor to meet at the Ambuvajya Mela in Kṣemarāja in 2019, where he was performing a Kali Puja at night. So the true Aghorīs are explicitly Śākta Aghorīs, and it is striking how the definition of the original Atimarga 3 Śākta Kapalika influx would fit such a group. And indeed, they belong to an oral tradition, and the practice may be said to be embodied knowledge, but the practice is certainly text and tradition specific in many ways. We see here that that it corresponds with Gavin Flood's quotation here: distinct Kaula ritual system comprising initiation as possession, avesha by the goddess, consumption of impure ritual substances, the charuprashana, the vira pana, along with erotic ritual, maithuna, with a consecrated partner, the duty, blood sacrifice, bali, and collective orgiastic worship, milapa or milaka. So it's interesting and tempting to ask whether their practice could potentially throw light on the earliest influx of Śākta traditions into Shaivism. So, thank you.